Hello divers, this is Chris with Dive Zone Scuba for another technical diving tips and techniques video. In this video we are going to discuss submersible pressure gauge failures and preventive maintenance. This is a typical example of a submersible pressure gauge. It is a brass and glass gauge frequently used in technical diving. This gauge is no longer fully functional due to water intrusion. Common causes of water intrusion include damaged high-pressure spool O-rings and debris on a sealing surface. What is a high-pressure spool? It is the metal component that is fit between the submersible pressure gauge and the high-pressure hose. These are three different types of spools. You'll note that there is an O-ring on each end of the spool. If the O-rings are damaged in any way, water intrusion may result. Debris on an O-ring sealing surface can include salt crystals and hardened lubricant. This can occur either on the inside of the submersible pressure gauge or the inside of the high pressure hose. Submersible pressure gauge maintenance includes replacing the high pressure spool O-rings and removing any debris on the sealing surfaces. In this image on the right hand side are two typical high pressure spool O-rings. They are typically of size 3. And to the left and center is a tool to install the spool O-rings onto the spool itself. It is possible to put the O-rings on the spool itself, but sometimes it is very difficult, and the tool in the image is very useful on putting on difficult O-rings. If you decide to use a tool like this, it is actually a two-step process. The first step is to take the O-ring and to insert it over the top of the piston on the narrow end, and to use your fingernails to pull the O-ring down to the base of the piston. The second step is to insert the spool into the base and then to place the piston on top of the spool. Then the next thing to do is to rapidly move the O-ring down the piston shaft onto the spool. If you're lucky, what will happen is the O-ring will then pop onto the groove on the high pressure spool. To remove the debris from the O-ring sealing surfaces, a small wire brush can be used. The wire brush is inserted into the opening in the submersible pressure gauge and rotated a few times. The O-ring sealing surfaces in the high pressure hose are cleaned in the same manner. Prior to reassembling the submersible pressure gauge, high pressure spool, and high pressure hose, it is essential that lubrication be applied to the high pressure spool O-rings. In use, the gauge frequently rotates, and if the high pressure spool O-rings are not lubricated, the O-rings can become damaged. After the servicing, there are no more bubbles. Notice how the pressure gauge is reading 0 psi. This gauge actually flooded during a dive. However, it continued to function. The internal components of the gauge eventually seized and the gauge stopped functioning. Performing preventive maintenance does not mean that your gauge will never flood. However, if you do perform preventive maintenance, it will increase the probability that it will not flood. This is Chris with Dive Zone Scuba. Thanks for watching.